and partnerships are needed to tackle this issue. Also, I think that homeless themselves and former homeless should be included, especially in policy designing. So that's are my point for this morning talk. And once again, thank you for the opportunity, and wish you for a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency, for a most interesting input in relation to housing and homelessness. I'm very interested in your innovative approach in Madagascar. I was privileged to visit some of the projects a few years ago. And what's really interesting is how the government has taken on the responsibility of roles and various responsibility in relation to homelessness. I thought also was interesting the development of partnerships, which is really what we're all trying to achieve, because we know we can't do it on our own. The challenges is one that's very dear to my heart, and I know many of the hearts and people here at this event, is that we need to have the people who have experiences of homelessness and poverty to be involved in any policy issues related to homelessness. So thank you so much indeed, Your Excellency, for that input this morning. Our second speaker is no stranger, I think, to any of us who works in the area of homelessness, and that's Marianne D'Antuono, who is an attorney and NGO consultant. Marianne is one of the founder members of the Working Group to End Homelessness, and I have also been a privilege and continue to be a privilege to co-chair the NGO Committee on Social Development with Marianne. Marianne, you have the floor. Marianne, you have the floor.
You're muted.
I got it. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jean, for that introduction, and good morning to all of you who are here today. I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors and everyone who worked hard to put this event together. Since 2017, as Jean mentioned, the International Association of Charities has placed a very important focus on homelessness in our policy and advocacy work at the UN. But actually, for centuries, we have been concerned with the need for a home for people living in extreme poverty. The International Association of Charities, or AIC as it's commonly known, is a 400-year-old organization comprised of volunteers who work on the ground in 56 countries around the world with over 100,000 volunteers. And our goal is to work together against poverty. We are also one of the 5 NGOs here at the UN who constitute the core of the Vincentian family. And as Jean mentioned, we've been involved with the Working Group to End Homelessness since its inception. I'd like to share a couple of thoughts on progress that I've seen over the past few years. Historically, homelessness has not been the topic of discussion here at the UN. We saw very little reference to it as we began this work in 2017. I would like to note that the word homelessness or homeless is not mentioned anywhere in the Sustainable Development Goals, nor in the reports of progress that we are making on those goals. It was, as the ambassador mentioned, began the Commission for Social Development at their 58th session began the discussion of this by putting forth a resolution with the word homelessness in the title. That was really the precedent as well as the impetus to move it forward to the General Assembly. And I'd like to thank Madagascar as well as the members of the African Union, because they took a very, very strong leadership role in moving that resolution forward to the third committee so that the General Assembly could adopt it in December of 2021. You know, at the UN, we often hear, if you can't measure something, you can't see the progress, you don't make progress. Well, I'd like to start with the fact that you have to first name it. And when we name this issue, homelessness, we are talking about people who are experiencing a life without a home. And that's who we're talking about. We're talking about people. And that's got to be in what we are talking, in what are the main focus of what we are doing here. Just trying to make, hold on one second, I'll get you a slide. Sorry. Is it moving forward? No? Like, oh, there we go. Okay. So I think that's very important to note. The second bit of progress that I think we have seen is that much more conversation is taking place. Member states, civil society, and people who lack homes together are trying to clarify the dimensions of homelessness in national context. Further clarification is possible because the resolution requires member states to begin to develop measurement tools and as well as to share best practices. And as the ambassador mentioned, that's really critical. Also, the General Assembly resolution calls upon the member states to pay attention to the creation of social housing with social protections, addressing the structural drivers of homelessness and working multi-sectorally, as well as linking the issue of homelessness with achieving Agenda 2030. That is a really important dimension of this. The third area of progress, I think, is that we see the conversation recognizing people experiencing homelessness as rights holders, with homelessness as a violation of the human right to housing. That conversation is becoming more distinct. The Secretary General's report in response to the resolution stated in paragraph 4 of the introduction that homelessness is both a concrete violation of human rights and an indicator of extreme poverty and social exclusion. Further in that section, in section 3B, the Secretary General calls for a rights-based approach to homelessness. Critical. We also saw that language at the UN Habitat Human Settlement Program resolution, Adequate Housing for All, this past June in Kenya. I think those three areas really are moving us forward. We've named the problem we're trying to solve, and we're putting people at the center of it. We have momentum in the world community to address this issue, and we see people who experience homelessness as rights holders. And that acknowledges that governments are obliged to ensure they can enjoy their rights on a non-discriminatory basis. I'd like to spend the next few minutes of my time just talking about some of the projects that the AIC has been involved in as a representative of civil society. Several years ago, our associations in Madagascar began a project called A Roof First. This is in a very rural area of Madagascar in the southeast. They built very small homes for widows who were excluded from owning property at that time because of the laws. Some of the laws have been changed, although I understand cultural practices still prevail. And many of those women, widows particularly, are unable to own property in certain areas. Well, it's very interesting that in February of 2022, right after the passage of the resolution, there was a major cyclone that went through this area, the Basiri cyclone. And many of those homes were destroyed. In fact, 30 were destroyed out of the 50-something that had been built. AIC Madagascar set to task immediately in trying to rebuild those homes. And why? Because there's a sense of urgency when your neighbor is stranded, and you have to do something to answer that call. AIC Columbia was dealing with civil violence and internally displaced persons. And in that area, many internally displaced people moved to Bogota in squatter settlements, primarily women and children, and they were seeking jobs and security. AIC Columbia, working with the Daughters of Charity and other civil society groups, knew that their projects of developing work skills and mental health services were not the total answer. Housing had to be built. And so they began to put forward the program, and in a couple of years later, they were able to build houses for the people who were there. It was at that point that they believed that the healing and the recovery could truly begin. There are more stories, but unfortunately, due to time, I don't want to go through them, but I just wanted to say that these small projects, and often with working with people who are in the extreme poverty, point out the challenges related to homelessness at the local level. While solidarity with people who are suffering is a strong motivator, and we all want to respond to our neighbor in need, resources are limited and experience is limited. Sustainable housing is a need both in cities and in the rural areas. We need materials, access to land, and techniques that will not have to be replaced after each disaster. Time is of the essence. Moving to the future, we also need new approaches. There are two organizations in the Vincentian family that I'd like to highlight that are creating those new approaches. The first is Community Solutions. That is an organization here in the USA that is working across about 106 communities right now. And the second is the Ruff Institute of Global Homelessness at DePaul University, who are working globally on this issue and in their Vanguard Cities program. I'd just like to point out the similarity is that they both start with the belief that homelessness can be solved. They believe it, and the people they work with believe it. Community Solutions uses a community organizing strategy, and the communities themselves come up with the goals and the strategies to move forward. The Ruff Institute does that on a global scale. They have about 13 countries or cities or counties where they are doing the same type of thing and moving forward with a strategy to work with the countries in their local contexts, and they offer technical assistance as well as measurement, etc. So what do I think the path forward is? I think we have to continue to name the issue with people at the center, people without homes, homelessness. We got to humanize the issue, see this issue and the urgency that it presents to as a key problem that needs to be solved in all communities around the world. We got to believe that homelessness can be solved. And I think that's the beauty of Community Solutions, as well as the IGH strategy. And finally, we have to work together to make it happen. This is only going to happen if all sectors of society, both governments, civil society, businesses, academics, and the people experiencing homelessness have the opportunity to work together and to solve this problem community by community, home by home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for that excellent input to our session this morning, and reminding us about the journey of the resolutions that both of us were involved with the member states. And it was such a privilege now when I look back on it. I also like the idea of showing us, giving us examples, practical examples of what you did in Madagascar, Colombia, and in other places in building houses, and then you had the cyclone, and then rebuilding them. And that's an important part of the work which the AIC do, actually. And what struck me in everything you said was we cannot do this without each other. We complement each other. And that means that we're working with people who have an experience of homelessness and practitioners, academics. We work together to solve the issue. So thank you so much indeed, Marianne. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Francesca Leonetti. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Francesca. You've been a great friend to all of us involved in this work of homelessness. Francesca is a public policy analyst working as an associate research and advocacy expert with the United Nations Human Settlement Programme. Her work focuses on supporting the development and implementation of UN Habitat's roadmap to end homelessness by collecting and producing knowledge, advocacy, and capacity building materials. And all of us in UNANIMA International and the Working Group to End Homelessness have benefited greatly by your expertise in the last number of years. Francesca, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, UNANIMA, and all the hosts that have made this meeting and this discussion possible. I would like just to confirm that you can see my presentation and that is full size and that it moves. Perfect. Okay, thank you. I think it doesn't need to be repeated. Well, it does need to be repeated, while it has been said already several times by the esteemed speakers before me. But at UN Habitat, since its foundation, UN Habitat has worked to promote the realization of the right to housing as one that can support cities and urban agglomeration in addressing challenges related to poverty, to inequality, to exclusion. And this is particularly visible when it comes to homelessness. Homelessness is the extreme, we believe, is the extreme manifestation of the failure to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to adequate housing and to an adequate standards of living. And it has impacts on all different rights, and it leads to social isolation, stigmatization, and challenges in accessing the right to education, the right to health, the right to food. I'm always show this very nice graph that was developed by the NGO working group to end homelessness, because I think it's really central in showing us why addressing homelessness is central to addressing Agenda 2030, the SDGs, and the new urban agenda as well.
Excuse me, Francesca, can I disturb you for a minute? Could you just raise your voice a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, can you hear me better now? Perfect, okay. So as I was saying, I always show this nice graph that has been developed by the NGO working group, because it shows very well where the connection between homelessness and other rights are and why is it central to achieving all the SDGs. But as it was mentioned, indeed, the word homelessness is lacking from any of these SDGs targets. And we feel there is a lack of representation of the issue within this agenda, while it is so connected. As the agency that is working specifically through the lens of promoting access and monitoring access to adequate housing, UN Habitat has been highlighting some of the issues when it comes to lack to access to affordable housing is one of the major drivers of homelessness in all countries. There are barriers dealing with accessibility of housing, so people with mental or physical illnesses, as well as children and women fleeing violence, often have barriers in accessing housing. The private markets tend to exclude people who have been become involved with criminal justice systems. So there is a big issue surrounding accessibility of housing that leads to homelessness. There is an issue around habitability, so cramped, noise, crowded or round down housing conditions are undermining people's health and dignity, and therefore have a big impact on fueling the cycle of poverty. And definitely there is an issue around security of tenure and evictions. We know that there are gendered property regimes, for example. There are issues around big development-led evictions in developing countries that are displacing people and are bringing forward more homelessness. So these are the main issues and angles through which UN Habitat has been entering the discussion around homelessness. And of course, in cooperation with the partners, with the working group to end homelessness, with UNDESA, with member states like the African Union and Madagascar, we have been working to strengthen awareness around the need for create consensus around the structural drivers of homelessness, the connection with lack to adequate housing, and the need for the development of a definition that is internationally agreed, standardized, but at the same time inclusive and able to differentiate between the different experiences of homelessness, and consequently, of course, data collection methodologies. I will not go through the different steps because they have been already explained by everyone before me. On the 28th of September, the Secretary General will present the report to the member states within their discussion on social development policies. So this is, I think, on our side, the only thing I will add. I also want to recognize, like for us, the work started especially in 2019 with the EGM organized with UNDESA in Nairobi on the topic of the 56th Social Development Commission, so on affordable housing and social protection system for all to address homelessness. And in that specific meeting, the expert group, of course, recommended the need for a definition of homelessness that is inclusive and culturally and socially responsive, and that is able to differentiate between the different experiences of homelessness, the need to gather data, especially when possible, disaggregated data, so that we can actually speak about the different experiences of people, especially those who are marginalized and less visible when it comes to statistics. In particular, of course, we know that when we focus on only a minimal data of homelessness, we tend to exclude the experiences of children, of women, of people who have different gender identities, etc. And this is our all point that the expert group meeting brought forward, and that we hope will continue to be brought forward and recognized more and more in the coming works. So this was picked up by the General Assembly resolution on inclusive policies and programs to address homelessness that was presented by Madagascar on behalf of the African Union. The resolution was a step forward in several ways. It did acknowledge the need to tackle homelessness to realize the SDGs. It did present a strong commitment by member states to step up to the challenges and to ensure that human rights are protected, respected, and fulfilled for all, and that no one is left behind. It did speak about the intersection between poverty, climate change, housing prices, and discrimination. So moving away from criminalization of the behavior of people experiencing homelessness. And it was focusing on the need to harmonize the measurement, the collection, and disaggregation of data. Just very briefly on the report. So the SG progress report, it's available, so you can definitely look at it. But one of the main points, of course, that was focusing on is the fact that COVID-19 casted even more of a spotlight on the experiences of people experiencing homelessness. It did prompt cities and government to adopt innovative measures, especially at the beginning. So through legislation, provision of social protection and social housing, and especially through collaboration with private sector, with civil society organization, with people with experience of homelessness. But unfortunately, while we have seen that homelessness is it can be diminished when there is political will and additional resources, unfortunately, It has not lasted. It was like more on, let's say, the momentum of an emergency measure, and it was treated in a very emergency way. So while we have good experiencing and good practice from the pandemic, most of them unfortunately have regressed, not all of them. We have cases like some of the vanguard cities that were mentioned before, Norway, Finland, they have maintained the good results, especially focusing on prevention, but this is not the case for everyone. What the COVID-19, I think, kept, so it's something that we are still seeing, is that it really highlighted how homelessness encompasses a spectrum, and it's not only the experience of people sleeping on the street, but it's also the experience of people in temporary housing, in inadequate conditions, in unsafe conditions, and those that are involuntarily sharing their housing with others. And it has brought forward this focus on the fact that we need nuanced approaches, especially if we want to address the challenges of marginalized groups and of those that are that have been marginalized till now. We see that the lack of comprehensive information on the size and specificities of homelessness is still a big issue. We need to strengthen our data collection and the use of data. We need especially to have a better mapping of the regional variation. Only 44 countries are monitoring data around homelessness, and they're mostly the usual suspects, let's say. So we need to be way more nuanced in our work when it comes to collecting and using the data. Another point that I think has been mentioned is the role of a public strategy. So member states are the ones that are responsible for ensuring the fulfillment of the right to housing, but they, of course, need to work with all the other stakeholders and give the direction, the targets, and the accountability mechanism for the other stakeholders to be able to chip in and work together. We have seen this working in places like Newcastle upon Tyne, in Tshwane in South Africa. We have seen it at the national level, but it's something that we think should be stepped up and done more and more. The focus on prevention is still very small, in particular when it comes to like prevention, so housing policies that are ensuring that everyone has access to housing despite their background or their income, and also in terms of prevention strategies focused specifically to groups that we know are at risk of homelessness. So children living foster cares, people living prisons, etc. And then finally, something that we are seeing, but there is a call to see it more, is the true human right-based approach to homelessness. So people experiencing homelessness are first and foremost people with rights like everybody else, and they have to be integrated in any decision and any policy that it's impacting their life. We are seeing some step forwards. For example, in Canada, the National Housing Council of Canada has places on the council for people with lived experience of housing exclusion. Canada also set up an advisory committee to develop a new housing strategy, and this was also including people with lived experiences. The new law in Argentina is also requiring the state to ensure the participation of people with experience of homelessness in the design and monitoring of the outcomes of the strategy to end homelessness. So these are certainly step forwards that we're seeing and that we want to encourage, and that we call on other member states to pick up. And just to finish, as UN Habitat, our approach to end homelessness is rooted in human rights. As I said, people-centered. There is no single way in and out of homelessness, but everything needs to be tailored to the needs of the person. It needs to be housing led. So access to adequate housing is the, with support services, of course, but it's the way to address homelessness. It needs to be focused much more on prevention, be holistic and multisectorial and evidence-based. So this is what we hope we can continue to advocate for together with all of you, and to see happening more and more in different places. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Francesca, for that most interesting input as it relates to housing. And it's one of the big issues, of course. We do see that housing actually is a human right, and that's the way it must be seen. But of course, for me as a practitioner, housing is just not enough. We need supportive housing because of the complexity of homelessness and the issues. And you pointed out to us the issue of affordability, accessibility, habitability. So I think that's really important to point that out. Also the data, which is something we in the Working Group to End Homelessness continue to look for in relation to the drivers of homelessness, because then we can do something about it. Also the clear definition. Again, it's a big issue for all of us involved in homelessness to have a clear definition. And one of the big issues for UNANIMA International is hidden homelessness, which is women, children, and girls. And we don't have the definition, always seems to exclude those people. And for me, you talked about the children as well, and I was delighted because it's a place where we break the cycle of homelessness. I had the experiences of working with 4 generations of family homelessness. And you say, where does this cycle, is it broken? And it's broken where the children are involved. So I think that's really important. And thank you again for your input. Our next speaker, again, is no stranger to us, Dr. Ife Ofon, the NGO representative of Worldwide Nigeria Network. Dr. Ife is one of the founder members as well of the Working Group to End Homelessness. She has been a career as a lecturer at the university in Nigeria. She then progressed to the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Nigeria, where she held many positions. Dr. Ife was a member of the United Nations Expert Group on Affordable Housing and Social Protection for All to End Homelessness at the 58th session of the UN Commission for Social Development. Dr. Ife is passionate about women's homelessness. Dr. Ife, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jean. I'm so happy that, that the ambassador and the previous speakers have talked about the definition of homelessness and the work that the UN expert group meeting, which I was part of, and Jean, we did in Nairobi. And then the resolution that came up in 2020, and then the GA in 2021. And now Francesca, talked in detail, well, somewhat in detail, the SG's report. So we kind of now have some kind of attention, momentum on the issue of homelessness. And I will not, dwell on it. However, my presentation would touch on the intersection between homelessness and custom and traditions, that undermine the intersection between homelessness and customs and traditions that undermine women's right to land, housing, and property. Not much discussion is going on around this, but because I come from Africa and I've worked around, the rural women and even some urban women, I know that this is a key issue. I will also be highlighting the burden of governance on homelessness. The burden of governance on homelessness, and and then the cost of governance and a lot of issues, that happen around culture, tradition, and then the burden of governance, and also the issue of conflict, political conflict, the activities of bandits, terrorists that are fueling homelessness in Africa. Okay, so in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there are many women and female-headed households who are experiencing less visible form of homelessness due to cultural barriers and social exclusion. Now, these women, as I'm talking, that I'm talking about, they don't have the right to inheritance. They don't have the right to land. They don't have the right to housing. Even though we all know that right to land, housing, and property are key factors that determine the economic and social well-being of people in the region. Okay? And then you find out, just like I said earlier, that there are millions of people that are homeless in Africa and even in some other places in global south due to insecurity, political conflicts, and attacks by bandits and extremists in their communities. These people, they fled their homes and natural habitat for many months. They now live in unsuitable camps, temporary shelters. Not much is being, discussed around these particular issues. So you find out that the children amongst them, they roam the streets. They don't have homes, okay? And they roam the streets to try to get food. The women are now more vulnerable and open to sexual violence and exploitation. Like I said, not much is being discussed around this particular issue. And I think it is high time that we begin to shed a little more light on the issue of, homelessness, the intersection between homelessness and customs and traditions, and the rights of women, female-headed households, as well as homelessness that is being driven due to political conflict, activities of bandits and all that. So I think that this is the time for us to begin to, talk about these issues, because if we're just talking about the ordinary homelessness, which we all know, then these people that are homeless, even though they're not very visible, their issue would not be addressed. So, like I said earlier on, that a large percentage of African women farmers, they depend on land for economic security and survival, even though they do not own the land they farm on. So this tenure insecurity is a huge constraint for more than 1 billion urban and rural women in many countries in the global south. So how do they inherit? How can they now own land when they cannot inherit from their father? They cannot inherit land or housing from their husbands because of culture and traditions. Is it to talk about the issue of widows who, because they do not have male children, they're being driven out of their homes. Their lands, the land that they have been farming on is being possessed by, their husbands, their dead husbands and family. So these issues, we have to bring them up so that as we are discussing, the issue of homelessness, let's begin to also look at, these other issues critically, because these issues are also fueling homelessness. So I said, that without land, without housing, without property rights, it's difficult for most women to stay out of poverty and to stay out of homelessness. I want to also reiterate the statement from the UN human rights experts from their annual meeting in Geneva recently that said all human rights are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So we have to look at homelessness from this particular lens. Now, the second point, major challenge, the second major challenge facing homelessness is the issue of poverty. Yes, we've been discussing poverty here and there, but poverty amongst women is critical because they don't have enough resources, that can help them to have their own housing so that they can stop being homeless. They don't even have enough resources to rent expensive apartments. And again, because of lack of education and collateral, they can't even get loans from financial institutions. So I would like us to also bring these women into our discussion because it is critical. I've talked about the issue of homelessness due to the burden of governance, insecurity, and political crisis that has rendered so many people homeless. According to the UN Refugee Agency in 2023, about 44 million persons in sub-Saharan Africa are displaced from their homes. Is it a Democratic Republic of Congo where we have over 6 million? Or is it South Sudan that we have nearly 4 million people displaced from their homes? They are homeless. Ethiopia, there's estimated amount of people, 1.8 people dislocated from their homes. They are homeless. Then in the northeast region of Nigeria, where I come from, violent attacks by Boko Haram and Islamic State in West Africa have resulted in this displacement of 2.5 million Nigerians, while kidnapping, extortion, organized criminal attacks in the Northwest have displaced over 800 people. Am I going to talk about the 2.5 million persons that have fled their homes in Benue State and southeast of Nigeria? So, okay, look at Burkina Faso, about 1.2 million persons don't have homes. They've left their homes. They're roaming about the street because of the Islamic group violence. Mozambique has more than 668,000 people. These are just a few examples of what political conflict, terrorism, and poor governance is doing to the population of our people. So when we talk about the cost of governance and lack of accountability and true democracy in Africa and some countries in the global south, it has taken a toll on their citizens. A lot of natural resources within the region, which ordinarily should be used to address the needs of the region, are being carted away to the global north, leaving many of the citizens in poverty and homelessness. So until the leaders in the region become accountable and transparent in managing the resources of the region, we will continue to have high number of the poor and homelessness in the region. It's painful because I know that every country in the region is blessed with natural resources, but the management of these resources have made it almost impossible for the government to take care of the needs of the citizens and the poor women, the vulnerable, and the homeless. So Marianne talked about the homelessness not being explicitly mentioned in the SDG, but the SDG talks about do not leave anyone behind and reach those farther away first. So it then means that we cannot even achieve the SDG without addressing squarely the issue of homelessness and its related issues. So to support people who are experiencing less visible forms of homelessness that I have mentioned, we need to urgently address the socio-economic issues, including the insecurity, cultural barriers the high cost of governance and also poor governance that are pushing people into homelessness on a daily basis. To fully address homelessness among women in Africa, it is key to also address those customary laws and practices that deny women the right to inheritance, land, and housing. Yes, we have the CEDAW. Many countries are signatories to the CEDAW. But how have they implemented the CEDAW? Those village chiefs and community elders that dispossess women of their land and their housing because they don't have a male child, and because the custom and tradition says you cannot inherit because you are a woman, none of them have been arrested. The government has not done anything to repel such customs and traditions. So if we are serious about addressing homelessness amongst women in Africa, and again, some parts of the global south, we need to revisit these customs and traditions that are daily denying women the right to inheritance, the right to housing, and the right to land. Furthermore, member states must also show the political will. Yes, I'm happy that Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Madagascar, talked about the schemes that they've put in place. But there are many countries that don't have these schemes. They don't have these schemes. And even when the government constructs low-cost housing, these houses end up with the same rich people. So the member states, they must have this political will to address homelessness. Member states must ratify, if they've ratified the CEDAW Convention, they should work hard to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women in all areas of life. And they must ensure that women's full development advancement in order that they can exercise and enjoy their rights, including inheritance, land, and housing rights, are guaranteed. Government should also strive, I'm emphasizing the word, to cut down on the cost of governance and ensure that natural resources are used purely for public good. They also need to deal with political issues in a transparent and democratic way in order to reduce insecurity, political conflicts, and unrest that are pushing millions into homelessness. So it is also important to put in place effective and efficient policies and programs towards poverty eradication, access to affordable, stable, safe, adequate housing as part of human rights for women and other vulnerable groups. I'm
sorry, Dr. Iffy, you're over time.
Yeah,
Can you just conclude,
I'm rounding
please?
up. Yes, sorry. I'm rounding up. I want to say that, that it is important that all relevant stakeholders, including civil society, member states, and the UN, should continue to raise awareness on the issue of homelessness and work to address the root cause of homelessness and the drivers. Also, in policy and program intervention, it is important to include all the stakeholders, both those that are experiencing homelessness and civil society, both in gathering data, in measuring, in monitoring and evaluating program designs, by government and agencies to address homelessness. All hands must be on deck. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Iffy. Because we're just going over time, I just want to say that I think all of us will see your passion and experience your passion for homelessness and women in Africa, and particularly that intersection with housing, custom and tradition. And I think you point that out very well. And maybe we can talk some more about that when we come to the questions, if that's okay. Can I just check to see if our representative is here from UNDESA? If Hanta is here?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, I can. Thank you so much, Hanta. and I'm delighted that you're here. And it's my pleasure to introduce Hanta Rafaela Amanana from UNDESA. Hanta is a social affairs officer in the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, leading work on homelessness, poverty eradication, and Africa's development. It's a privilege to be with you again, and it's always a privilege because of your passion around this issue. Hanta, you now have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Jean, for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. And I also would like to thank all the speakers who came before me for the interesting information that they provided on this issue of homelessness. So today I would like to talk a little bit about the reason why we are here, UNDESA is here. As many of you know, the first UN resolution on homelessness was adopted by ECOSOC in 2020, because the theme of that year's Commission for Social Development, which works under ECOSOC, was affordable housing and social protection systems for all to address homelessness. And I had the privilege to be part of the DESA Secretariat to provide substantive support to the negotiations of that resolution. And as I said earlier, it was successfully adopted in 2020. Then Madagascar led a few member states to push for another resolution on homelessness to be adopted by the UN General Assembly. And this was done successfully in 2021. So that resolution requested the Secretary General to write a report on homelessness, which was released earlier this year in July. And that report is entitled Inclusive Policies and Programs to Address Homelessness. That report will be presented to the third committee of the 78th session of the UNGA later this month under item 25 on social development. And so that report was written pursuant to UNGA resolution A/Res/76/136. The report provides a review of the progress, gaps, and challenges in inclusive social development policies and programs to address homelessness, given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It also discusses specific challenges faced by disadvantaged groups. Who are the disadvantaged groups? They are the indigenous peoples and racial and ethnic minorities, older persons, persons with disabilities, young people and children, migrants, internally displaced persons, and refugees. The report also provides social protection indicators to prevent homelessness because, as we know, social protection systems, including social protection floors, help prevent homelessness by reducing risks of poverty and improving access to education, healthcare services, and decent work. Moreover, social protection contributes to reducing inequalities, including gender inequality. So I'll just give two examples of social protection indicators that can help monitor and identify factors to address homelessness, and they are proportion of people experiencing homelessness covered by at least one social protection cash benefit. Of course, this indicator requires that we have the number of homeless people, and I'll address that in my next slide. The second indicator that is proposed in the SG's report is the proportion of people experiencing homelessness, disaggregated by sex and broad age group. covered by at least one social protection cash benefit. There are other indicators that are proposed, but including, for example, a proportion of people experiencing homelessness disaggregated by their the social group they belong to. For example, disaggregated by age here is already here, but whether they are migrant or not, whether they are they belong to an indigenous people group or not. So what are the recommendations that this SG's report give to our member states? There are many recommendations, but I'm only going to talk about two of them. One is on data. The report recommends member states to establish a comprehensive definition of homelessness, because without a clear definition, we cannot measure anything. The report also recommends member states to strengthen data collection and use, to regularly collect disaggregated data on homelessness, to support community-led knowledge production, including regular surveys assessing the exclusion and discrimination experienced by people in accessing housing, for example, healthcare, social security benefit, education, or employment. And finally, it recommends member states to provide public reporting on homelessness, including annual reports on data and trends. The second recommendation is on social protection. The report recommends member states to invest in universal social protection to enable all persons to cope with lifelong risks, so that they are prevented from falling into poverty and homelessness. Thank you for your attention. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much indeed, Hanta, for that report and bringing us through briefly the Secretary General's report, which is really a very important report for those of us involved in the whole area of homelessness, and particularly the challenges that are involved in it. But we also know that this can be resolved through social protection indicators and access to better healthcare, education, decent work. But of course, data is important, and data will help with a definition. And I think that is clearly what we are trying to achieve in the next number of years, working with this report. Also, I think there's a commitment from the Secretary General to member states that we have a report yearly on what's happening with member states regarding homelessness. And I think that's really important. So thank you very much. Our next speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome him, who has been involved with us too for many years in relation to homelessness, and that is Freek Spinnewitchen. And Freek is a director of FIANSA, a European NGO working group on the issues of homelessness and housing exclusion since 2001. He's vice president of the European Public Health Alliance and sits on the board of Social Services Europe and the European Anti-Network Group. Freek, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope you all hear me. Good afternoon from Belgium. Good morning for most of you, I think. There's only so much you can say in 7 minutes, of course, but I'll try to make 3 points or say a few words first about the trends in homelessness in Europe. I can only speak about Europe. It's already large enough, I think, for me, 27 member states of the European Union and beyond. And then a second point on how the EU relates to the SDGs. And then I'll end with a few challenges. So first, some information about trends in homelessness in Europe. Earlier this week, and that's a coincidence, we published a new report on the state of homelessness and housing exclusion in Europe, in the European Union, plus the UK. And we have attempted to come with a new estimate of the number of people that sleep rough or in a homeless shelter on any given day in the European Union area, plus the UK. And the number we came up with is almost 900,000 people. So 895,000 people sleep rough or in a shelter. And of course, that's a minimum. It's probably an underestimate. That's what we can account for. And it's only covering part of the homeless population. It excludes, for instance, sofa surfers or people living in terrible housing circumstances or in squats, etc. But it gives a good indication of where we are. And one, like if you calculate that per population, you arrive at 0.17% of the population. That's 17 out of every 1,000 people that is sleeping rough or in a shelter on any given day. And an inconvenient truth for the Europeans here is that that percentage is the same percentage, more or less, as the same prevalence as in the US. At USA, we pride ourselves on our social protection system, but apparently we don't manage to get less homeless people than in the US per population, of course. With that difference that in the US is much more rough sleeping, and in Europe, most of the homelessness would be shelter homelessness, homeless people living in shelters. Maybe more important is to compare that to previous estimates that we have done. This 895,000 figure is 30% more than in 2019, when we did the last time, the effort to make an estimate, and it's more than double than 10 years ago. So there is really something concerning happening at the bottom end of society. And what we're especially concerned about is the increase in youth homelessness that we see almost everywhere in Europe. But in spite of this dire picture, there is some reasons to be hopeful as well. And I don't want to not share these with you. First of all, there is some countries that have been able to reverse the trend of growing homelessness. Finland has been cited already many years as the example to follow, and it's an impressive example. They have managed to reduce homelessness consistently over the last 20 years. But there's also countries like Denmark, Austria that have been able to curb the trend and see recently reductions in the number of homeless people. And if they can do it, I think also other countries can do it. Also, we see that there is an increasing number of European countries that have national homeless strategies with the ambition to end homelessness or substantially decrease or reduce homelessness. I think when I started 20 years ago in Fianza, there was probably 4 or 5 countries that had a national strategy. Now we're talking about more than half of the EU member states, and that's encouraging. Recently, in the last year or 2 years, we saw countries like Sweden, Spain, and Netherlands coming up with new strategies with ambitious targets. And it's not only the strategies that are a reason to be hopeful, it's also that the policies in place are increasingly evidence-based. We know what works, and that knowledge seems to be integrated in policies and practices more and more. Hence the interest in Housing First, for instance. Now there is probably 2/3 of the EU member states that are experimenting with or scaling up Housing First, and that's also encouraging. And there's also countries that do these kind of things, make progress in policies, but don't see that reflected yet in reduction of the numbers. And that's, of course, something that is difficult, especially for policymakers that have the courage to commit themselves to reduce homelessness, but it seems to be part of the reality. Second point is, how do we relate in the European Union with the SDG agenda? I think that Europe feels too little concerned by the SDGs. Especially the commitment or the commitments related to end extreme poverty under SDG 1 and to ensure the right to housing as part of the SDG 11. And you see that very clearly, and I don't want to go into details, you see that very clearly in the first voluntary review of the SDGs that has been published by the European Commission on behalf of the EU. If you look at what they report on under SDG 1, it's only positive news, poverty going down, different aspects of poverty going down, but there's no word about extreme poverty. And the same good news story when it comes to housing, quality of housing improving, housing affordability for the whole population improving, etc. It would have been useful if they broke that down by poverty status, for instance. It would give another picture. But the problem with that, or the problem underlying here is that the goals, the way they're concretized and measured by the UN, allows the European Union to ignore them. If extreme poverty is people living with less than, what is it now, $2.15 a day, you don't capture the reality of extreme poverty in Europe. The reality of extreme poverty in Europe is homelessness, and we are close to 1 million on any given day. And the same is true with the right to housing. If you focus on slums, I'm not saying there's no slums in Europe, but if you focus on slums as the concretization of that objective and to measure it, you don't capture the reality of extreme housing exclusion. That's homelessness in Europe. So that makes the UN resolution or the 2021 resolution of the General Assembly so important to put homelessness on the agenda as an issue in its own right. So we welcome that, especially the focus on data collection and definition. Last thing I want to say is in terms of challenges. There's incredible amount of challenges. I have no time to go into detail there, especially related to the implementation of policies and implementation of the ambition. Not in the least the problem of dysfunctional housing markets. Like, how do you solve and prevent homelessness when housing markets don't work properly? Like, that's a massive question, but I have no time to go into detail. But something that is often forgotten, and I think useful from an international perspective, is that we also experience the challenge to get and keep homelessness on the political agenda as a social policy priority. In Europe especially, there is the tendency to think that if you do well on poverty, you have good social protection systems, that homelessness is a non-issue, but it's not the case. We have to really fight to keep it on the agenda. And I have to say that the European Union has recently done some good work. It launched what they call the EU Platform to Combat Homelessness in 2021. And that platform wants to support the member states in their efforts to reduce and eventually end homelessness. And it has 3 action streams, and I'm not going into detail, but the action streams are first, data collection and monitoring of progress. Second, everything that relates to transnational mutual learning, identification of best practices, research, etc. And the third action stream, which is about access to funding and to financing. So to EU loans and to EU grants, subsidies. And that helps, such initiatives that helps to keep homelessness on the agenda in the EU. I don't think we have to underestimate that, like member states committed to be involved in that platform, and it helps to keep homelessness on the agenda. But at UN level, and I don't want to be too crude or too severe, but at UN level, I think such a structure, such an action is missing. There is plenty of commitments, very important reports. I don't want to underestimate how important they are, but probably not a solid framework to turn these commitments into action. And I see that there is the ambition to work on data collection, etc. But maybe we have to bring these initiatives together into a solid framework. A very last suggestion for the UN, and again, it's already difficult at European level, at global level, it's really complicated. It will be more complicated. But I think that homelessness should not remain the topic only of DESA and UN Habitat. It should also be a concern for the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, the World Health Organization. Homelessness is a health issue as well as a housing issue, and we forget to say that. UNICEF, the International Organization for Migration, the impact of migration on homelessness is huge. Most of the increase in Europe is explained by flaws in migration policies, and also at the regional level, regional representations of the UN, such as UNECE. In spite of promises of UNECE to work on homelessness, I have not seen anything in recent years. So that mainstream of homelessness beyond DESA and UN Habitat, I think would be very welcome. Thanks a lot for your listening.
Thank you so much indeed, Frigg. And again, we see your absolute passion. I follow you avidly on social media with all your reports and your passion around homelessness in Europe. I'm afraid you took my breath away when you gave the numbers of 895,000 homeless, which has doubled in 10 years. That is breathtaking. And I think that's where we have to, to look at Europe and see how effective the policies are. But you gave us some hope about Spain and Sweden and the Netherlands in their homeless strategies. And that's really what we're trying to attain in many of the countries around the world. So thank you very much indeed for that input. Our final speaker, and it's not just a final speaker, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Mary-Ann Broxton, the main representative to the United Nations from ATD Fourth World. Mary-Ann, please take the floor now as we're coming to the end. You're on mute, Marianne.
Hi, I'm sorry, Jean.
Can you unmute, Marianne?
Hi, Jean. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm having a little bit of internet problems this morning with connection, so I'm just going back and forth. And I thank you so much for the introduction and for asking me. I'm sorry. Give me a moment here. I'm learning how to do all of this in real time. I think I'm back on this screen.
You're very good.
Okay, thank you, Jean, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak here today. And thank you so much to my fellow panelists today. And thank you so much to my fellow panelists for your insight.
You're coming over on
for sharing your insight and knowledge with all of us. In the United States, as in with many developed countries around the world, home ownership is the #1 way to create generational wealth. By simply owning a home over a long period of time, the value appreciates. This fact has made the price of homes unattainable for many. And at the same time, the cost of renting, the alternative to home ownership, has skyrocketed and is increasingly out of the reach of people. So, for example, I live in Boston, and in order to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in the city, a person would need to earn $42.22 an hour, or $87,920 a year. That's just for rent. That it doesn't include food, it doesn't include transportation, childcare, electricity, or heat. And this is where I'd like to let you know that last winter it was -9 degrees for a couple of days in the city of Boston. So how do you manage this as a single parent of 3? Or how do you feed your children? Or what do you see your children if every waking hour that you spent is ensuring that you can afford to keep a roof over their head? So all of this, the things that I've just described to you, is because the way that we look at homelessness, that housing is wrong. Housing is a human right, but we treat it like a commodity, not an essential basic need or a common good. Instead of seeing the fault with the system that allowed for the financialization of housing, we instead see a deficit in the people who are unable to attain housing. They must have done something wrong. They don't want to work hard enough, even though, as I just shared with you, 104 hours a week to afford a studio apartment, just one big room. It must be because of substance abuse or mental health issues, even though people that have experienced homelessness have said it was homelessness itself that led to the mental health issues that they are currently experiencing. Because even after you become housed, the effects of homelessness can linger, sometimes for years. Or that, people just want to live on the street. They're happy with it. They're content living on the street. No one wants to live on a street. Many of the people who do so is because they said they don't feel safe living in a congregate shelter. So the reason I'm saying that is there are multiple reasons why people experience homelessness, from cost to eviction, fleeing domestic violence, climate or conflict in some areas, and the consequences of development in others. When I say that, think about the idea of sports stadiums or highways that are being built around the world that leveled communities in the name of progress. But the one thing that all of the people have in common is how they are treated by society and looked down upon, to the point where homeless becomes their social identity. So this othering and distancing them from us makes the criminalization of homelessness that much easier. The laws that make it illegal to sleep on a bench, the hostile architecture, like you may see in some different areas, benches that are actually just a slanted piece of wood that you lean against and you're not able to sit down and relax for a little bit, or the benches that have the armrests every 2 feet so you're not able to just, again, sit down and rest and relax in a different area. That's done with a purpose, you know. The idea of arresting organizations that are going out in different areas and offering food to people that are experiencing homelessness, or police confiscating and destroying possessions as a way to make people move along from a certain area. I talk about this because this form of policing of people experiencing homelessness is a way for policymakers to appear to be doing the work without actually meeting people's needs. You know, and a perfect example of this, we were talking about, previous guests have talked about COVID and some of the things that come out of it. A perfect example of this policing is that when at the beginning of COVID, the city of Las Vegas decided that the best way to ensure there wasn't an outbreak of COVID in congregate shelters was to paint 6 foot by 6 foot squares on the ground in a parking lot for people that were experiencing homelessness to sleep in, as an idea that they're being distanced with the 6 foot area on the ground. This was in a parking lot that was surrounded by luxury hotel rooms that were completely empty during quarantine. So again, the idea of the appearance of doing something to make it seem that we're meeting people's basic needs. I want to say that I'm naive enough or overly idealistic to simply think that nicer to people will solve the issue of homelessness, but we can't begin to address the issue if we collectively designate people experiencing homelessness as unworthy of help by denying them their inherent dignity. And
Marianne, I think you have gone.
And I really think that that's a way that we end things. One way is to start by uninsured illness or a no-fault eviction or a natural disaster away from homelessness. You know, COVID just proved like how vulnerable we all are, how inadequate our safety net systems are. We need to stop denigrating the people who are just trying to survive systemic policy failures when we talk about homelessness. It will also take system change and a huge influx of money. And we talk about, well, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. But I know it can be done because we just saw it during COVID with emergency shelters, eviction moratoriums, extended unemployment benefits, and monetary subsidies that were being kept people in their houses. But as was mentioned and as is stated in the Secretary General's recent report, now that this crisis is over, these measures have ended, and homelessness is on the rise again. So once again, policymakers who appear to be doing the work without actually meeting people's basic human needs. I say that because when we say that the crisis is over, when there's 1.6 billion people experiencing homelessness, the crisis is not over. You know, that we are still in crisis mode. Too often we hear that we could solve X, Y, Z if only we had the political will, and that was mentioned by one of the previous speakers earlier this morning. So in a few days, world leaders will be gathering just up to date that they're going to be gathering for the General Assembly. A few days later, they'll be gathering for the SDG Summit. You know, now is the chance to find that political will as they're all gathered in the same room. You know, we can still do big things like ensuring everyone has a home, and we shouldn't accept any excuses for not being able to do so. We talk about, well, because of COVID, we were set back. People that were experiencing homelessness, people that were in poverty, they still were able to multitask as a means of survival. We should, with all the advancements in technologies and the things that we have access to, we should also be able to multitask and be able to ensure that every single person has a home, that we can create the policies that allow for this. I really appreciate Her Excellency when she mentioned that we need partnerships to do this. And when Jean said that we can't do this on our own, we need to have participation. I agree with that completely. We cannot, the people that know firsthand, the real experts who experience homelessness, have ideas of how to solve these issues and the problems that people are facing, need to also be at the table, or otherwise we're just doing the same thing over and over again instead of being able to do big things. I thank you for your time today and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was, I must say, a well-informed presentation. And I think what you brought out to us again is the housing is a human right, not a commodity. I think that's really important. And the other thing that you said, it's not mental health that leads to homelessness. It's homelessness that leads to mental health. And the other thing that you talked about is when people get a house, it's not enough to get a house or a roof over your head. People are traumatized by the experience. And so I think trauma-informed support is really important because a house won't solve the issue. You still have the issues that made somebody have an experience of homelessness. And also, I think the whole area of, seeing homelessness as people unworthy of help. That's not where we're at. We're all, in some sense, out of home at some stage in our lives. So thank you so much indeed for that input. Unfortunately, I think we're running out of time, but if anybody has a question they'd like to put to any of the members, please do so now. I think there's one for you, Francesca, that your passion towards the resolution on homelessness is palpable. Rights-based approaches are very important, but what can we do to address the systems that exclude people and are antithetical to the provision of social housing? Francesca.
Thank you. I mean, it's a big question. I don't think I can answer them all of it now, but I think the two things are not like are part of the same strategy. As in, if we are clear that housing is a human right, then we have to address the issue of speculation and the issue of discrimination. And once we are clear about this, then we can promote legislation, for example, that is promoting tenants protection or no-fault eviction, like people from no-fault eviction. We can establish rent controls. We can promote zoning reforms that are supporting inclusionary zoning. But it needs to be, I would say, both at the level of the state, there should be this understanding, and at the level of communities, because we have seen, like, for example, Not in My Backyard's movements at, like, challenging the establishment of inclusionary zoning and social housing in certain areas of the city. So it needs to be as like whole of society. I know it's a lot of UN jargon sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's what we need. We need also strengthen education on what constitutes the right to housing, like Frick was mentioning as well. It's like often we have this perception that if someone is not living in a slum, then their right to housing is not violated, when in fact there are so much more to the right to housing than just slum condition. And we need to be able to identify like this spectrum and advocate for the right to housing in a way that is respectful of people's experience, but also bringing to the table the different components of the right to housing. And we need to do it both like at the level of member states, but also at the community base. So it goes back, I think, to the issue of community-led cooperation and partnerships, and having like strategies at the national level that are setting the targets and the commitments and a role and an accountability system for all the different stakeholders that need to be involved, private sector, community-based organization and academia, data production, etc. So
thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you so much. I do see Amanda, you have your hand up. Do you wish to address somebody?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the last speaker about something she said with lived experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, with lived experience. And I just have to say, not just because I am somebody with lived experience, but because I've seen the way things have changed when we have included people who have actually experienced the event and given them the education to put their lived experience into context on the greater whole. And I've seen just such a push forward, especially in our community in Seattle, of making changes based on that and it being successful. So I just wanted to highlight that's huge, and it has made changes here, huge changes.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I think you're right. What we keep saying is don't talk about us without us. We need everybody around the table to discuss the issue. I want to thank everybody for coming to the event today. UNANIMA International were anxious to highlight again the issue of homelessness, that sometimes we worry in case it's going to go back under the table again. And so we wanted to keep it highlighted, and particularly before the Secretary General's report to the UN General Assembly on the 28th of September, and also with the SDG Summit coming as well. We have informed both of these reports, and particularly as it relates to women, children and girls. We ask all of you here to keep this issue on your agenda. If you want to hear anything else about homelessness and the work we are doing, please contact us and we will respond even to any questions that haven't been able to be answered today. Thank you all very much for coming and for your contribution to the issues of homelessness. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Have a good morning.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Oh, we're nearly there. Molly, you're on mute. Oh, you're there.
I think we're there.
Oh, that was a challenge with 7 speakers. Unfortunately, I could feel myself if he was going over, but I was intent on trying to keep up with what she was saying. And I think, did you say Francesca went over as well? So maybe that's just a learning that maybe we just try and connect with the moderator. I don't know, we'll have to do it some way. Because I suppose if you're presenting, you don't see the messages coming in. But I think it went really well. I mean, sorry, Molly.
No, and we have less speakers at the next one anyway, so that will make it a bit easier.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it was, there were 7 good speakers, and I think it raised the issue, gave a profile again to the issue, you know. I thought Freak was particularly good because you never kind of think of Europe as these wealthy countries with homelessness. So I thought he was quite passionate too, you know. And Marianne, I thought she was excellent.
Yeah, no, fantastic speakers.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you both very much. I'm glad it's over. What time is it?
You can take a breath.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's good. On to the next one now.
Yes, and I'll send through the run sheet